maybe just on quickly what we're going to do, I'm going to show you something about SAPPO's commitment, because I think it's relevant to the concept that we're going to talk into. Maybe a bit about the pork industry itself, the producers and the sows. You need to understand the structure that we deal with in South Africa. The pork abattoirs and carcasses, maybe just the distribution thereof, and then a bit about African swine fever and the way we see it. The pork production itself all over South Africa, and maybe just a bit of a concept. And then I want to show you something about the carcass price, because we can talk whatever we want to. The economy is driving people. That's why people act in a certain way. I'm going to show you the retail price. I think we're one of the few commodities in South Africa where the retail price went down over the past 10 years. And then maybe just a bit on what is the way forward. So if somebody asks me about SAPPO and asks what is my task and what do we need to do, we said to ourselves we need to have a commitment, and this is our commitment. And I just want to highlight the words. The first thing is we committed to grow. Firstly, we said our vision is a sustainable pork industry. And that goes beyond South Africa. It goes further, because what happens next door also has an effect on us as an industry itself. So we talk about growth, and there's a commitment to it, and just to have a look at the word sustainability, which includes the One Health concept, especially the environmental side. Collaborative, I think it's more than ever that we need to collaborate. I think it's one of the most difficult times for us as animal protein producers. And then I think there's a big thing about the integrity of pork. The mentality is your perception. And it's not just for me as pork. For Deerwald, if we have an outbreak, all of a sudden there's, in people's minds, sick animals going into a value chain. So integrity plays a major role. And then we took up stewardship. We said we take responsibility of what we do as a pork industry, and we're going to push forward to be a great steward. I think one of the main things I've learned is we don't communicate enough. We don't talk enough. We don't communicate to the relevant parties enough. And then the last one is, we said we want to be a leader in agriculture. And we're small, we're not big, especially in the way you handle specifically notifiable diseases. Throughout South Africa, we have registered about 528 producers in South Africa, but that is not all the pig and pork producers in South Africa. That's people commercially registered with us on our system. That's about 143,000 sows. I can tell you now we lost about 20,000 sows last year, purely because of an economic crisis. So the update, and we normally update on a yearly basis, but the update's already there that I can tell you we lost about 20,000 sows commercially and informally. We have about 138 abattoirs in South Africa. Main regions is the Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and then Gauteng. Then you have different other spaces where we play. All over South Africa, we are, I think the least is the warmer parts is the Northern Cape. Remember again, this is commercial, this is SAPPO as being registered. I'm not talking about pig production as a whole in South Africa. If we have a look on how it looks like for us, the majority of people are smaller scale people. If you turn it around and you say to yourself that the size of the businesses, it's the other way around, and the majority of people, being in the 2,500, they are the owners of sows. You need to understand this, because the moment you need to start fighting against the virus, or you want to do an increase in production, this is extremely important to understand. If we go to the abattoirs, it's exactly the same. We have 138 abattoirs in South Africa, of which, about 20 of them are mainly the suppliers of pork in South Africa. If we have a look at the industry itself, I want to get your mind there to state that if we talk industry, if Dr. Marja and I need to talk about the industry itself, and we need to kind of verify industry, it is everybody in South Africa farming with a pig. You cannot deprive anybody with not having a pig, by no chance. And no law is going to determine that. It's a state of economy, it's where people make good money. A pig eats anything. Dr. Marja just explained to you vividly what happened in the Eastern Cape. That is reality. But that's the world that we live in. So our world, and that's why it's so difficult, varies from where you are at the bottom up to the top. I've been in Spain last week. We have top-class, world-class pork producers in South Africa. There's no two things about it. Top-class processing factories in South Africa that can compete against the best in the world. Genetics, they are here. Top class in the world. We compete with them on an international status, and we are doing excellent. However, then we also deal with peripheral farmers where there's no infrastructure and very difficult to manage. Actually, impossible to manage or to control. So this is how our industry looks like, and you need to be mindful if we create a policy or even if we implement a policy, because this is normally where it falls flat. You can't, I don't know, there's no in between for this. You can't be either at the bottom or the top. Something else needs to drive it. So if we go to African swine fever, I first need to say I don't think there's a country in Africa with more experience of African swine fever than Dr. Marja. By no means. They still dream of when it's going to happen, and if it did, it happened in one farm, and they think they're excellent in what they do. We were in a meeting where we were on a panel discussion. They're still discussing, should they fence it off, and is government going to pay for the fencing or are the farmers going to pay for it? We're far beyond that. So the understanding of African swine fever for us is beyond what the world knows, purely because we lived with this for quite a long time. I want to echo to what Dr. Marja said. It's not a salvatic cycle anymore, it's a domestic cycle. It's in South Africa. I can never say never, but the man or the woman who would be able to eradicate African swine fever in South Africa can be president. It is such a difficult deal to do. I just want to get you into our world. So you sit with commercial farmers, with the informal sector, and then pig keepers. The pork production, the commercial pork production in South Africa is done by 30% of the farmers. So the majority is done for the formal market in the top photo that I showed you. Then we have informal and pig keepers. We were involved with the Eastern Cape slaughter. Informally, 485,000 pigs, I think we killed. So we believe, and there is no system that can measure this, that for one pig standing commercially, there's somewhere a pig, either informal or a pig keeper, where there's a pig in the backyard that nobody knows of. And nobody has any say onto that pig. There's no regulation. There is many that can actually formally kind of control that. Why do I talk about that? If we go to African swine fever, I don't think we've been in the history in such a desperate state as where we are today. For us as animal producers, I think it's one of the most difficult times to be in, because it went from nearly nothing up to outbreaks where they don't even report it back anymore. So we are in a desperate state. What did we do, and how do we see this as an industry? For us, it's about risk. You manage risk. So when you break with a virus, there's no going back to ground zero anymore. You have a risk. And the most difficult thing is how to manage that risk. And law is quite clear to always push us back to ground zero. However, the practical side of it doesn't allow us always to go there. And there's very little even government can do to maintain that. So let me give you a practical example. We break in a small-scale area. We went in, Dr. Marja and I had bank accounts. We bought back pigs with the concept of maintaining the disease. The price informally for that pigs were higher on the local market than any of the best producers could gain in South Africa. So we paid market-related prices, as what the law says. Next time we broke, just close by. Firstly, I had it once where one of the guys pulled a gun and said, here, we don't negotiate. You pay us what we want. Okay? When we needed to bargain, they said, we don't need to mind. We're good. So the pig starts flying out. There's no system that can maintain and contain it. So what happened? They actually started spreading the disease by selling off, because it's the first way, the easiest way to mitigate the risk. So do you understand, even with a law that's absolutely beautiful, it's so difficult to implement that law in an environment like what we have in South Africa. And it's easy to blame. For me, it would be easy to blame Dr. Marja, I must be honest. And I think it's easy for her to blame me or Dewald or whoever. But that's not the case here. The case is the ecosystem that we deal in with is so complex. The moment you push in and you do something, you actually harm somewhere else. And this complexity needs to be addressed. So what did we do? We said to ourselves, first, we live in a dualistic environment. You need to understand that. I'm not compromising to anything. Dualistic means we deal with beekeepers. Nobody controls except an economy, their own. There's no animosity from their side, but they manage their own risk. But that risk became a great risk to the health status in South Africa. That's the way we spread the disease from top to the bottom, because a piece of meat went down, maybe not tested, maybe bought somewhere that didn't go through an abattoir. So it's dualistic. We said to ourselves, we need to be mindful if we implement something. You always need to have this dualistic kind of concept. Then we said to ourselves, if we need to manage this, we need to manage risk. So I could remember the first time we broke in the Western Cape. I needed to address the local government. And it was chaos. Never broke, never happened before. They had this vision to export, and this harms export big time if you have a disease outbreak. And I could remember I said to him, you broke and you have 5 bad news, if you can say it like that. Choose the lesser of the 5. There's no one that's 0. And many times we want to fall back to 0. There's no 0. No 0. We need to go for the lesser evil of what we do. If we go into just, irrespective of all this, just have a look at this. Do you see the graph how we grew in the past? So if there's one thing in the industry that's beautiful, it's the resilience of the industry. So last year we slaughtered about 3.8 million. We lost about 20,000 sows, of which I know about 11,000 commercially. So I can tell you, if we have this year the same kind of concept of what we slaughtered here last year, I think we would be in good standing. I do not have the national capacity now to export. The growth in South Africa eats whatever I can produce. So exports for us is still such a great opportunity because we haven't even tapped into it. The most difficult one with exports is if you have an outbreak like foot and mouth or ASF, to counter that, and to see how you can do it. So we have a good growth trajectory in the industry itself. 2018 was one of the worst times we ever had with listeria. Even now, we still maintained a good growth trajectory. If you go back and have a look on the year on year, 16, it was negative, and then it was 2.5, 8%, 6.5, 2.9, and 6.8 again. We average about between 5 and 6% organic growth every year, which is amazing for an industry that is, to a certain extent, battling the concept of animal diseases and the rapid increasing thereof. Carcass prices, so 10% up here, but if you put inflation to it, we're 24% down. So how is this possible? How is it possible that you can have all this growth, people still investing, and we have this? Efficiencies. So when we did 24, and that's where genetic people are great. They play a great role in our total concept. Efficiency-wise, if we had, say, 5 years ago, 24 piglets per sow per year, or let's say 1,800 kilos per sow per year with a certain food conversion ratio, the whole aim is to go more with less, and that's what we do. So that's the one thing. The other thing that helps us here is the scale of economy. What we've seen in the past is all the, I don't want to say, not negatively, but all the more or less efficient farms, the older farms, the smaller farms, were the ones that kind of fell off the track in the past 5 years. If we have the look at the average retail price of pork, It was up 29%. If you add to it or you put the inflation back, it's down 7%. That's why pork plays such a major role in the diet of the local South Africans, because actually our prices came down. So a stunning opportunity for us as a protein industry. Maybe just on the last slide on the way forward. Firstly, I want to say it's a collective. I don't think us as an industry is going to stand up and say this is the way we're going to do this. Collectively, I mean, Dewald and I are good mates, but collectively we need to find an answer. Collectively with Dr. Marja. It's not just one person's concept that needs to settle this. I also want to say about collective means the value chain itself. For too long we had people in the retail buy whatever they want to, don't adhere to certain conditions just for the sake of selling, or maybe using us to define their own market, to differentiate their own market. It's gone. It's gone. We need to go back to say food security is a major issue in South Africa. And don't get me wrong, it's not commercial, it's the whole value chain. It's the whole value chain, up to the pig keepers. If you think of half of what we deal with here, it commercially goes informally in, so there's a massive food security issue the moment you pull it out. So we all need to play in this concept. Now we have 5, I think I've missed one, but let's talk about 5 focus areas. The first one is consumer assurance, and the main thing about consumer assurance, which is the vet side of what we do, is to manage the risk. To be proactive and understand the risk and to manage that risk. We started with a new concept of business intelligence, which was not heard of, and the NAMC let me go on what I get as a levy, and we started this because we believe the gold of South Africa is the untapped data that we deal with. To give you an example, if a pig leaves a farm, it goes to eventually to a retailer. What integrity did we put into that meat? And that integrity I can only put into the data that we have. So we had a discussion this morning before I came on data integrity, added value to it. So we have a pig movement app. What do you do with the movement? You lock your call. What do you put to that call? Your status of when last did the vet visit you. The status of where it was collected. When did you send that pig to an abattoir? When was it slaughtered? And all that integrity is put into a piece of pork, eventually to get to a point where we can serve a client with a conscience to say, but there's a lot of integrity into it. World of Pork was this intelligence system that we utilize, is something that we developed from scratch. So quite impressive in the way that we dealt with it, and how we report back. Then business development, we venture into a new phase. We keep the existing because there's a major focus on mentorships and coaching people in the industry. But we put a lot of time and effort into our SAPPO Academy to teach and learn people. We've seen that especially the market in the informal and beekeeping side, the leeway I have is to influence people. I don't have the right to walk in and say this is the way you need to do it. But people are hungry to learn. And we need to find clever ways where everybody can learn. We have a little maniki, we call him Zach, on the social space. Not connected to anywhere, but with a lot of relevant info he pushes out. 330 to 340,000 people linking into him. Go and read and see it. That is, for me, that is brilliant in just lifting the national health status in South Africa. Consumer education and communication is the marketing side we know. We push to make sure that the category of pork in South Africa is well presented. And it goes for every piece of pork. So we don't focus on specific brands. But Dr. Marja mentioned about what the pigs eat in the Eastern Cape. That category is to a certain extent battling. So how do we uplift that category? Last one, corporate governance, is about accountability and the accountability we have in the system that we utilize. I want to end off with a visit I had about 5 years ago. So I was just new, I'm out of banking, and I might not, one of the most influential political analysts paid me a visit at that time. And it was a Friday afternoon, and for 2 hours he put on my board, I have a blank piece of board in my office. He drew some pictures on how the industry could help rural development. And the whole thing was one individual farmer, one pig in the rural areas. And for 2 hours, I was now presented this piece of work that he kind of went through. And I could remember we just broke with listeria, and we just had the WHO here and the OIE, and it was just all over. And I could remember I've asked him a question. I said, I also have a vision. I have a vision that every person eating a piece of pork in South Africa would eat a piece of pork full of integrity. And he looked at me and he said to me, you are countering my plan. I said, no, sir, but I think you've missed something. There are about 7.5 million to 8 million immune deficient or compromised people in South Africa. And normally, if you have a look at the demographics, they live in areas that you and I don't live in. They should eat the pork with the most integrity in South Africa. Then I've succeeded. And he looked at me and said, why do you define this? And I said, sir, I never wrote the book of biosecurity. I never wrote the book of the damn African swine fever virus. But we need to think outside of the box, not to compromise food security and food safety. And we need to go beyond our history and look into future and say, how can we break into a different space? He came back to me and he apologizes for being arrogant to show me 2 hours and we actually could do it in 10 minutes. And thereafter we had a very good relationship in dealing with it. But that day my mind was pricked with this concept of stating every person in South Africa, if it is a piece of beef, chicken or whatever, should eat a piece of meat with a lot of integrity. And that, the main drive for us at this stage is, for certainly, is the animal health state in South Africa. Thank you. I think that was the end.